In this video, I'm gonna show you the best Warframes that you need to have right now in 2026. We will go over how they work, what makes them so ridiculously strong, where you can farm them for yourself, and of course, I also have updated builds prepared for all of them. Big shout out to all our generous channel members who help me keep the lights on, and now, let's jump right into it. Now, before we talk about the first frame though, you know how it is with top 10 videos, I gotta make a quick little disclaimer. Of course, as with every top 10, there is heavy personal opinion involved here. These frames today are my personal top 10 as of making this video. However, in case your favorite didn't make the list, that does not mean that they're a bad Warframe. In fact, it was actually super darn difficult for me to narrow it down to just 10 frames because basically everybody is viable in the 2026 meta and the whole roster looks very good. So, if you have other favorites, then you're of course welcome to let us know in the comments down below. And then lastly, just like I said, I'm gonna provide a build for every Warframe on the list. However, I'm only gonna show you the screenshot with not much elaboration because in a top 10 video like this, there's just not enough time to give an in-depth explanation on why I chose which mod. So, if you disagree with my modding choices, or you simply have questions as to why I did a certain thing, then I would highly recommend checking out one of my dedicated videos on the specific frame, because there we have the time to dive in much deeper. With all that being said, let's take a look at our first Warframe. But alright, number 1 is somewhat of a regular guest on many top 10 Warframe lists, not just mine, but rightfully so. I'm talking of course about Protea. Protea, man, I don't know, she is just absolutely amazing in so many ways. First of all, survivability. If you throw her shield grenades with your first ability, that gives you so much shield recharge that it is pretty easy to shield tank with her. But even if the shield breaks, an additional benefit here is that you get a longer shield gating invincibility duration. As long as you have energy, and you don't just run straight into a toxin cloud, it is very difficult to die as Protea. As for the energy economy, absolutely no problem. You just use her dispensary and that will give you all the energy you'll ever need. By the way, also very cool in Railjack, because due to the fact that Railjack and Warframe shares the same energy pool, that means with Protea as a pilot, you will always have the juice that you need. However, don't you think that Protea is just a very survivable support frame? Let's talk damage output. Protea's Blaze Artillery is one of the most busted, the most ridiculous high-scaling damage abilities in the game. This auto-turret doesn't do all too much damage at the beginning, but if you group up enemies with something like the Sciated or a grouping ability that you infuse with the helmet, the damage scaling of this goes absolutely into the stratosphere. If you want to, you could give her a helmet ability of choice over her 4, but also the 4th ability with the Augment Temporal Artillery. That's pretty neat in a way because it allows you to be more mobile and have the Blaze Artillery on for longer. It's personal preference, both ways go. As for the builds, this right here would be an example build for a standard Protea playstyle with the Blaze Artillery, but of course this is not the only way you can play her. If you want to get your own hands on Protea, then you gain her main blueprint from the Deadlock Protocol quest, something that is relatively accessible early on. However, the components can be somewhat of a tedious grind because you can get them from the Granum Void, and I know people usually don't like that all too much. If you can, just snipe a Protea Prime set cheap on Warframe Market or something, and then you're good. Alright, so before I started recording this voiceover, I double-checked my last year's top 10 Warframe list to see how my opinion changed within a year. And I was honestly shocked to see that for whatever reason, I didn't have Kullervo on the last year's list. How can that be? So yeah, number 2, Kullervo. If melee gameplay was a Warframe, then Kullervo would be it. Whichever melee weapon you're playing, the best place to put it would be in Kullervo's hand. I don't think I have to explain all too much why that is, right? We all know Wrathful Advance, we all know the ridiculous red crits that we get out of every melee with it, but still, I want to say that Kullervo is more than just Wrathful Advance. For instance, his survivability is incredibly good with I think the augment released last year in autumn, if I'm not mistaken, where the daggers will stay around you for longer and give you a continuous influx of overguard. This way, not only can you benefit from basically constant overguard gating, which will keep you alive infinitely, but you also now have the opportunity to run something like Arcane Truculence, which will give you passive viral priming to every enemy around you at the same time. However, one thing that many players tend to forget is that Kullervo also has this really strong ability where he links together enemies and then they all share damage. Doesn't only work for melees, but also very strong for guns. However, one thing that made Kullervo even more ridiculous as a crit-focused melee frame was when DE released the augment for Styanax's Tharo Strike, Tharo's Lethality. With this one, you get increased crit damage against enemies that are hit by Tharo's Strike. And as we all know, Tharo Strike is Styanax's Helmet ability. Now, why do I say that? Because if you take Tharo Strike as a Helmet infusion onto a crit-focused Warframe, like Kullervo, then you can make it even more ridiculous. Because now, not only do your melee hits overcap on crit chance with the tier bazillion red crits that you get, no, these hits will now also overcap on all the crit damage that you get from Tharo's Lethality. This right here would be a standard melee-focused build that I would recommend running on him, including the Tharo's Lethality augment, but of course, if you wanted to use a different helmet ability, that one slot would be flexible. But okay, how do you get Kullervo if you want to have him for yourself? Well, for that, you need to venture to Deviri. To be more precise, during the Anger, Sorrow, or Fear cycle, you can fight Kullervo as a boss in the Kullervo Arena in Deviri, and from that, after you finish the Deviri run, you're gonna get a resource called Kullervo's Bane. From this resource then, you can go to Akrithis, the Deviri vendor, and purchase all the blueprints that you need for him. However though, one more thing that I want to say before we go on here. If you haven't built Kullervo yet, then it might be worth waiting for a week or so, because according to the release dates, Kullervo might just be announced to be the next Prime Warframe at TennoCon. And as always, if you could leave a quick like for the video, that would be really nice, because it helps me big time with the YouTube algorithm in getting these guides out to more people. So thank you so much for your support. Alright, the next frame might come as a bit of a surprise, and I totally get that, because I'm surprised myself that I put him on a top 10 list. I wouldn't have seen him anywhere near a top 10 list in the past, but now Nidus is an absolute monster. Let's talk about him. See, last year as one of the strongest weapon platforms, I had featured Harrow in my top 10 list. And Harrow is still definitely perfectly fine. However, I feel with the recent Nidus rework, he kinda sorta fulfills a similar role as Harrow, but depending on the weapon, he might even outperform the man himself. See, the fact that his larva is now an actually usable ability because you can recast it without needing a mandatory augment for it, that is absolutely huge. Not just for convenience, but also because you now have essentially one more mod slot to play with in your build. However, the real kicker with him is that now his parasitic link can go onto your free-moving companion. This way, you unlock the most ridiculous ability strength buff in the entire game that can easily get you to over like 800% ability strength on Nidus. 800% ability strength. That is so ridiculously overpowered. Now, what do we do with all that ability strength? Well, basically you can do whatever you want, but my favorite would be to use the augment that gives you a lot of weapon crit chance, scaling with ability strength. With such high figures, you can very easily total at a higher crit chance than you would if you were to run the same weapon on Harrow. On top of that, survivability with Nidus has become even more ridiculous. It hasn't ever really been a problem in the past, but now with Arcane Persistence and the stupid high health pools that we get on Nidus, we don't even need to heal ourselves anymore. We can just wait until our health is depleted and sacrifice a couple of mutation stacks to just respawn instantly. This right here is the Gunrunner build that I currently run on him, and if you want to get it for yourself, the acquisition is a bit of a pain in the butt. I'm just gonna show you the drop table right here, and if you can, just get the Prime variant right off the bat. Alright, while Nidus might have been a bit of a surprise on a top 10 list, the next frame definitely isn't, and basically has been on my top 10 list ever since he released. Of course, I'm talking about Owl Wizard Dante. Now, Dante, ever since he released, has been one of the strongest S-tier Warframes in the game. It's just the full package. If you want to deal damage with an exalted weapon, well, his Noctua is pretty darn powerful. If you want to nuke enemies away with abilities, then say no more, he can do that with his Dark Verse. Survivability? Absolutely no problem, because not only can he give Overguard to himself and his entire team, but also he gets constant Overguard regeneration, which puts you in a state of infinite Overguard gauging. As long as you take out enemies or get assists, this regeneration will just go on forever. And of course, as if that's not enough, he has 2 more skills with which he supports the team, buffs the damage output as well as distracts and makes the enemies more vulnerable. Honestly, he just has a ton of options and his entire kit is just absolutely amazing. When it comes to building him, I actually want to show you 2 different build options here. The first one would be how to play him as a gunrunner with his exalted weapon Noctua, and the second one is a more ability nuking approach where we subsume over the Noctua and instead use him as a nuke. Both playstyles are equally viable, and these are kinda sorta the main ways to build him. One more thing though that I do want to mention here is that he recently got a new deluxe skin, which I think looks pretty darn spicy, as well as a new augment. This augment in and of itself doesn't really reinvent the wheel, right? It's a good one, but nothing crazy. However, it gives you more options, which is always a nice thing to have, and it can help you with the energy economy if you're struggling with that as a Dante player. Last question then, how can you get him for yourself? For that, you will have to finish the Whispers in the Wall story quest as well as the Deadlock Protocol, and then you can get his parts from the Disruption mission Armatas on Deimos. Alternatively though, you can also go to Lloyd in the Sanctum Anatomica and purchase those parts for Vessel Capillaries. Now, we already talked about how Nidus is a super great gunrunner when you want to get the utmost crit out of your weapon. However, if crit itself is not really your concern, but you just want to have the most elemental damage on your gun, then we're talking about the next frame on today's list, and that is of course Seren, another regular on top 10 lists, and rightfully so. Now, being a somewhat old lady already with regards to when she released, I don't think I have to explain all too much about how Seren works, right? You use her first ability to spread spores in the entire room, which strips away enemy armor through corrosive. Use the augment for the first ability to get crazy corrosive infusion on your weapon. Use your toxic lash to get crazy toxin imbuement on your weapon. And then in many cases infuse Zata's Whisper to have void imbuement on the weapon at the same time. The amounts of elemental damage that you get out of it is just absolutely crazy. Seren is a menace. The only quote-unquote issue that we kinda sorta had with her for the most part was survivability. However, thanks to Arcane Persistence, this now also is not a problem anymore. See, what we can very easily do is infuse Gloom from Sevagoth onto our Seren. This then makes it that enemies who take damage from us in some way or another will heal us for a portion of the damage that we deal. And naturally, with all the enemies in the room being affected by spores taking constant damage over time, this heal rate will easily be higher than 500 per second, meaning we will always out-heal the 500 damage per second that we're getting through Arcane Persistence. This way, Seren is now basically immortal as well. This right here would be the Gloom Seren build in question that I personally run. However, there are also countless other build options that we have with her, and if you want to learn more, then you can check out my recent updated Seren guide on that as well. Just one more thing that I of course have to mention with Seren, and that is you can play Sobek acid shells. This synergy is as old as time. Every creator has already talked about it multiple times, so I'm not going to get into the details right here, but Seren Sobek acid shells is some of the most ridiculous fun you're ever going to have in Warframe. As for how to get Seren for yourself, the main blueprint, you acquire it from the market, and then the components, you will get them from the Kayla the Thame boss fight on Sedna. Alternatively, you can also get her from the normal circuit rotation in Deviri, which might not be the worst idea, because in that rotation you will also acquire the very nice augment, Venom Dose, for her first ability. Okay, Protea, the first Warframe on today's list, is someone who many of us like to call a perfect Warframe, just because her kit is so nice and synergistic and strong overall. However, the other Warframe who is often considered the quote-unquote perfect Warframe would be the next one, and that is Gauss. Gauss, oh man, Gauss is so strong but also super fun to play at the same time. You can be super duper speedy and blitz through the levels. You can buff up your weapons with heat, cold, or blast damage. You can set the entire map on fire with Thermal Sunder, which is actually a pretty darn good scaling ability when it comes to damage. But of course, you also have weapon buffs and fire rate, and you can get totally invincible with the kinetic plating. And yeah, what I'm trying to say is, he is a lot. He's fast, he's active, he's a ton of fun to play, and very strong at the same time. When it comes to the builds, also with him you have a lot of options what you want to focus on, but for the sake of this video, I'm just going to show you the standard gunrunner build that I personally prefer on him, that you can then for example combine with his signature weapon, the Exceltra, to just blow up everything. Oh yeah, and naturally, the drip. His new skin, the new face mask, mwah, chef's kiss, and probably the biggest buff that Gauss has gotten in a long time. If you want to get him for yourself, then also here you get the blueprint from the market, and then the components drop from the disruption mission Kappa on Sedna. Another reoccurring candidate from last year's top 10 list would also be Wisp, who continues to be one of the strongest options in Warframe, also now in 2026. If you like an active playstyle where you have a strong and mobile Warframe, then not only Gauss, but also Wisp is tailor-made for you. With her 3 stationary Wisp modes, she can buff herself and the team in various different ways, healing, more maximum health, movement speed, electricity zaps, you name it. However though, she herself kinda doesn't even need all that heal because she's pretty much untouchable. With her passive, she becomes invisible whenever she's not on the ground, plus her decoy ability not only hard distracts all the enemies around you, no, it makes her invisible as well. And as if that's not enough, it also kinda sorta functions as a better version of Rolling Guard, because whenever you swap positions with your clone, you become temporarily completely invincible. As for the damage side of things, she has the infamous ability Breach Surge, which not only blinds enemies but also creates very strong surge sparks, which are technically ability hits, but they can still crit. And due to the fact that Wisp can be invisible, that means she can benefit from all sorts of arcane crepuscular related crit buffs, which then translate into the crits from Breach Surge. This way, Wisp can get some absolutely disgusting damage numbers. This right here would be an all-round Wisp build that I personally run sometimes. However, especially with Wisp, there are so many different ways that you can build her for so many different mission types, weapon interactions, helmet setups, that just this one screenshot alone here will never be able to cut it. Now, to get her for yourself, you gotta finish the Chimera Prologue quest, and then you get all her blueprints from the Ropalolist fight on Jupiter. The next contender is new on today's list, but even though she was good in the past, man is she busted in 2026. Let's talk about Hildryn. Now, Hildryn might be a bit of a spicy topic here because the devs recently announced that they might be looking into potentially nerfing her, because according to them, she might just be a bit too crazy when it comes to blowing up absolutely everything. And naturally, if the developers themselves are potentially considering tuning a Warframe down, then that should be no surprise why she made the top 10 list. So yeah, first of all, survivability. Hildryn is basically untouchable. She has a super ridiculously high shield pool, plus in Pillage an ability with which she can steal armor and shields from the enemies and give it to herself. But now, in 2026, we have a new arcane which gives you even more shield by transforming your ability strength into even more shields. Hildryn players like that. The whole star of the show though would of course be her exalted weapon, Balefire Charger. These things in and of themselves are not that overwhelming, however if you combine it with the augment Aegis Gale for your 4th ability, then they get an alternate fire mode with a burst fire of explosive rounds. This damage gets higher the more shields you have, so another neat synergy with the new arcane, but also the explosion radius of this can go absolutely ham because it depends on your ability range. So you can see, while this is a little bit very strong. But yeah, I don't want to get too deep into all the synergies in this video. If you want to, check out my dedicated Hildryn guide, but this right here would be my overall Hildryn build that I currently have, plus the corresponding Balefire Charger build. Just keep in mind though here, it is a weapon build, so naturally you can just swap out whatever you want and tailor your Balefire Charger to whichever mission you're about to play. To get Hildryn for yourself, you gotta fight the Exploiter Orb down in the Orb Velis, or just like with all the other frames on today's list, you can also always just get the Prime. It's easier, it skips the grind. Let's though move from one power lady to the next, and that would be Glass Cannon Gara. And when I say glass cannon, then I mean that quite literally because she's the glass Warframe. I don't mean that she's fragile, because that's definitely not what she is, because she's one of the biggest tanks in the game. With her Splinter Storm, you get 90% damage reduction, which is huge, plus it serves as a scaling damage ability that can easily get into the millions. Her Shattered Lash ability is also stupidly strong because it doesn't only wipe the entire screen clean of enemies, but it also goes through walls and has crazy high range, so yeah, what else could you ask for? And as if that's not enough, With the brand new Arcane Sculptor, which gives you ridiculously high energy efficiency, you can also spam her into a sort of room nuking ability much easier, in a way that you trigger the Sculptor Arcane by making her Glass Ring with her 4th ability, and then just blow it up, rinse and repeat. In the past, this was always a little bit expensive on the energy, however with all the efficiency that we get from Arcane Sculptor, we can basically spam this all day long. What's very cool here is that even though Gara is so strong, she's one of the earliest Warframes that you can acquire in your playthrough. Her main blueprint, you're already gonna get that from finishing the Saya's Vigil quest, which is the intro quest to the Plains of Eidolon, and then also her component blueprints just come from the Plains of Eidolon bounties. That is super easy to get and nice also for early players. When it comes to the builds, I'm only going to show you this one example build right here, which is focused on using Shattered Lash, your swiping melee ability. And regarding all the other playstyles, I'm going to look into making an updated Gara guide very soon. So if you don't want to miss that, you might consider maybe leaving the channel a sub so you don't miss it day one. Welcome to the crew! Before we now get to the final frame on today's list though, let's real quick talk about some honorable mentions as it is tradition for top 10 lists. And the first one I want to get into here would be Auraxia. Auraxia, ever since she released, was incredibly powerful. She gives you toxin imbuement just like Saren. She can latch onto walls, become invisible, she has a ton of potential and is very strong as a weapons platform. The reason I didn't put her on the list? Well, technically speaking, Saren with her Augment Venom dose does get a little bit more damage numbers out of her weapons than Auraxia. However, it would still feel unfair to not mention Auraxia here, which is why I think you can technically go and use both of them interchangeably. Another super powerful contender would be Uriel. He is probably the newest frame on the list, but oh man is he strong. His Pyro Nuke is probably one of the strongest in the game because it doesn't care about line of sight, it just kills everybody in range. And on top of that, he's also super powerful, survivable, and he has heat imbuement abilities, which, as we all know, imbuing elements on a weapon is always ridiculously powerful. Next, we would have Rhino, one of the oldest OG Warframes and still an absolute powerhouse. Roar, probably the strongest damage buffing ability in the game. Iron Skin keeps you safe forever, and the rest of his kit is also nothing to scoff at. Rhino might be old, but he is still gold. The same, by the way, also goes for Korra, another frame that I wanted to mention today. She is and always has been very powerful, no matter if you want to play her as a Beastmaster into Venari, which is perfectly viable by the way, or you just want to go full loot goblin with your Pilfering Strangle Dome, throw your whip in there, and have red crits all over the screen. Korra is amazing, and I will try to revisit her later this year, see if I can do some updated builds on her. Another honorable mention would be Mesa. You might have been confused that she wasn't on the list yet, and that is fair because she is ridiculously powerful and she can delete the entire screen of enemies in just a split second. However, on the other side, a whole lot of other Warframes can do similar things. Yes, Mesa has totally the potential to be strong enough for a top 10, but I chose to give the last spot on today's list to someone else, another Warframe with Exalted Pistols, so let's talk about her right now. But alright, the last spot on the list. I kinda sorta already gave it away. We're talking about Titania right here. And this one might come as a little bit of a surprise, because many players know that Titania is strong, but they probably wouldn't see her as top 10. And that is fair, so let me explain my thoughts here. Titania is very strong in her damage output. With her Dex Pixia, she has ridiculous single-target DPS, but of course, compared to someone like Mesa, she does not really have the room-clearing capability. She's more of a single-target focused frame. However, the reason why I decided to feature Titania on this list is that she is one of the most versatile frames and specifically excels in situations that you constantly encounter and usually you don't like them all that much. If you want to go and let's say run capture missions over and over again for relic farming for example. Yes, you can go with Wukong and his cloud form, but technically speaking, Titania can do the same thing. Another example, exterminate missions. If you want to clear the map as fast as possible, you can go Firefly Titania, infuse Thermal Sunder on her from Gauss, and then just breeze through the level while spamming that and all the enemies around you will die. Want some more? Well, let's talk about the most tedious and worst gameplay experience of all, Solo Interception, the bane of every Warframe solo player. Well, turns out that Titania is basically a cheat code for this game mode. Just go and use your Lantern ability on an enemy that is close to one of the Interception Tower consoles, and that then forces all the other enemies around to focus on that guy rather than actually hacking the tower consoles to get the tower back from you. This way, you can basically disable the entire map while all 4 towers are under your control, and all you need to do is zip around in your Razorwing mode a little bit and pick off the occasional Eximus unit. Now, this right here would be an example build for a more, let's say, damage-focused overall approach for her, with a Dex Pixia like this, but also here it's a weapon build, you can do whatever you want on it, it's just a normal auto pistol. As for how to get it for yourself, in case I made you curious, you need to play the Silver Grove quest. As part of this quest, you're not only going to get the main blueprint, but also the component ones. However, alternatively, you can also get her from the normal Debiri circuit. And now, also check out my full 2026 Warframe tier list to learn about every frame in the game. Another massive shoutout to Demon Lord Zell, Demon Emperor, Emperor Prime, Nostlinux Gaming, Undercanio2, Pepperwolf, Mihawk, Socrates the Almighty Rat, Leo Morizaki, Han Tares, Patrisator, Boomia1, Zaif, Awindai, Azengen, Quax, Blue Eagle 98, Hearthrealed, Everin 8802, Gabriel Tevez, Yaku Ivan Gonzalez, GE Schnoz, and all other generous channel members for your continuous support. We see each other hopefully in the next one, and until then, as always, good loot.